Hello artists, welcome to lesson 5. Now, just by looking at the outline, you can tell that this lecture will be philosophical in so many ways. That is why I would recommend that you listen to this lecture during a time when your body is rested and your mind is relaxed. Such condition will help you to understand and appreciate the concepts here. Okay, let us begin. Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, once said, "An unexamined life is not worth living." Now let me ask you, how much do you agree to this statement? What does it mean to examine one's life? Does this mean that we need to be always critical of our actions and thoughts? Would it not make us tired eventually? What if we are at our lowest point? Would being critical not drag us down even more? The answers to these questions will come to you if you would listen to the points I would mention here, and if you would also heed the advice of Socrates. The term soul-making is a method or a phase that can be experienced by anyone, as we are all creative in our own right. Although it plays a major role in art production, it is not limited to the obviously artistic persons only. Soul making is also more than the soul's religious perspective. It means that it is not exclusively for people or group of people who are religious. As stated a while ago, soul making can be experienced by anyone. The term soul here refers to a person's individuality that resonates with his or her behavior. Soul making relies on how a person experiences life. Life includes a lot of adventure, and through the understanding of the challenges that come with each adventure, a person, through art, may understand his or her unique way of seeing or perceiving things. The creation of a soul requires constant seeking, settling, and surrender. It is through these spiritual processes that we can create and recreate something that expresses the product of our life's examination. Dr. Norman Narciso, one of the leading Filipino thought leaders in the art world, explains that soul-making is an alternate place to know oneself and to look at the depths and meaning of what we do in our daily lives. Soul-making is a step towards a deeper comprehension of how the world is perceived and how his or her or their own personality is perceived as well. In soul-making, in this process, who are you is the topic that throughout the process serves as a guidepost. Soul-making begins with you. Knowing oneself begins with consciousness. In order to start the process of soul-making, it is necessary for a person to realize his, her, or their truth, okay? Embrace one's truth, history, and you must have your own understanding of existence. Once we become conscious, once we gain consciousness, we come up with a new insight. This newfound insight, the very core of soul making, can make art. Our ever-changing insights, of course, of the world and our experiences help us to create and recreate art in different forms. Below are the categories of soul making. Okay, so again, please remember that in order for soul making to take place, you need to be aware, you need to be conscious. And once you are conscious, you form new insights. Through these insights, you can create art, genuine art. And these are the categories of art when soul making is experienced. We have images or visual arts such as paintings, sketches, films, blackout poetry, and so on and so forth. We also express our spirit or soul through stories, sounds, movements, and original, though sometimes weird techniques that in history birthed the different artistic movements and styles. Have you once experienced listening to a type of music or sound for the first time and you found yourself getting goosebumps or maybe feeling like you are being lifted and sent to a different dimension because of the instrument or music seemingly psychedelic effects? Have you experienced that before? Musical instruments are considered as a bridge to the unknown because they create sounds that exceed our words, thoughts, emotions, and sensations. It is therefore not surprising that there are long-standing musical patterns and instruments used in old and even the thriving spiritual practices. Movements in dances, just like the magical music, also allow human beings to express not through words the highs and lows of life and the messages of the universe. These art forms allow us to not only understand how an individual perceives his or her world, but through these manifestations of others' souls, we are also able to understand ourselves. Okay, let me reiterate. Through the manifestation of the souls of other people, we get to know who these people are. Okay, through the artworks, for example, of Van Gogh, we get to understand him. Okay, through his works which he created during the soul making phase. Okay, but of course, soul making is not simply all about creation. It also involves the understanding of the visual elements on which an art was focused. Okay, it's also about making and deriving meaning from art. Okay, especially when we look at visual art. Okay, we need to understand the visual elements on which a particular visual art was focused, particularly the concepts of design. This will enable us as viewers of an artwork, especially a visual one, to make sense of the work. It is important to remember that the viewer must have a certain degree of understanding of the work's style, shape, and material. It would be impossible to appreciate the visual arts in their fullness and completeness without such understanding. I believe that this has been mentioned several times in my previous lecture files. That is why I have included in some of the lectures the elements of art, the basic things that you must know about art. Now let us move on to the phases of soul making. Now, I want you to remember that soul making is not a phase or a process which can only be exclusively experienced by artistic people or religious people. This one may be experienced by any person in the world. However, in the lecture, you will realize that there is one thing that can hinder a person to experience soul making. What is that? You will know. Continue listening to the lecture. Okay, our examination of our lives does not happen overnight. It is not an overnight occurrence. It happens continually or continuously, while for others, it happens constantly. These three adverbs, continually, continuously, constantly, differ in their definition of an action's repetition. And the choice of adverb depends on a person. There are 5 phases in the process of soul making. Some people do not even make it to phase 1. Why? It is because they live their lives in autopilot mode. They exist as if without much care about their self, others, and the entire world around them. They are like empty vessels with holes. Despite their or others' attempt to fill them with inspiration, they remain empty, uninspired, unconscious. Remember that soul making begins when you start consciousness, when you start realizing who you are, when you start examining yourself. When you live in autopilot, when you are unconscious of how you are living your life, you won't be able to make it to phase one. Now, these people have this endless suffering, and it would only cease if they would at least recognize that there is a need to pause and to acknowledge the challenges of life. So instead of shunning or setting aside these challenges, not minding them, people who may experience soul making instead sit down and process their pains. By doing this, you would allow lessons of life to mold you and your heart in order to create something new. Others, on the other hand, actively seek for answers to make sense of the world and to begin healing the wounds caused by the self. Now, when you seek, you will be able to experience soul making. In contrary, if you would continue on living your life in autopilot mode, you might not be able to experience soul making. John Keats, an English romantic poet, was a seeker. When he was still alive, he witnessed the deaths of so many of his loved ones because of tuberculosis. Now, instead of wallowing in pain and disregarding his emotions, he acknowledged these pains or these challenges, and he was able to experience soul making. Now, allow me to read to you an excerpt from one of his letters. I will call the world a school, instituted for the purpose of teaching little children to read. I will call the human heart the hornbook, used in that school, and I will call the child able to read, the soul made from that school and its hornbook. Do you not see how necessary a world of pains and troubles is to school an intelligence and make it a soul? A place where the heart must feel and suffer in 1,000 diverse ways? Now, for John Keats, it's very clear that the soul has to be formed by two components. And what are those two components that can mold or form the soul? Those are the human heart, which he considered the seat of emotions or the book, and the world as the school, the place where we learn about life. Keats realized in his sufferings that the soul can be formed if the heart is used as a book to learn about our emotions, and if we would treat the world as a school, a place where we can learn about life. Keats, through his examination of his life and his pains, was able to leave a legacy of beautiful romantic letters and poems. In this contemporary time, we have many John Keats still, people who instead of burying their pains and not processing them, would instead try to cope and process these challenges, and through the processing, they experience soul making, and through the newfound insight, they are able to create something creative. An example is this one. A student of mine created an original sonnet in 2016. I tasked my students to write an original sonnet. And then one particular sonnet, a particular student, before she finally let go of the piece of paper that contained her sonnet with a photo, asked me if she could take a picture of her work. I asked why, and she said that she's going to read it for someone special. I wondered and then eventually learned that her grandma just died, and she wrote this for her. See, she was in pain, She was missing her grandmother, and instead of keeping the pain to herself, she allowed it to become an inspiration to write a beautiful sonnet. Allow me to read it to you. If only I knew that this day would come, I should have treated you far more better. If only I knew you'd never come home, I should have held your hands even tighter. If only I knew I'd see you never, I should have gazed at you for hours or so. If only I knew you'd leave forever, I shouldn't have agreed to let you go. But no matter how much I wished to know, I did not. I did not, and I could not. Now, all that was left of me is sorrow, and the things I could have done but did not. Now, all I could do is utter your name, but you're gone, and it will never be the same. It's very heartfelt, right? The emotion is really there, and you can tell, well, because the emotion is there, and it's really a manifestation of the sadness, the sorrow she felt when her grandmother died. That is what soul making is. Okay? It gives you the inspiration to create something that has soul, that has spirit, that is inspiring. The Message by John Keats is also written by author Stephen Levine in his book Poesis. Poesis is the creative act, and he explained that it is through the constant disintegration and reformation of ourselves that we can create. It is not through unconsciousness. Living life mindfully by allowing ourselves to experience the void, by falling apart and letting go of what already is a part of the past, and by not making assumptions of the future, can the possibility of creative living arise. So he said in his book, it is essential to human being to fall apart, to fragment, disintegrate, and to experience the despair that comes with lack of wholeness. To what can we turn then on this moment of crisis? I believe it is at this critical moment that the possibility of creative living arises. If we can let go of our previous identities and move into the experience of the void, then the possibility arises for new forms of existence to emerge. Poiesis, the creative act, occurs as the death and rebirth of the soul. We are called upon constantly to reform ourselves, to engage in what James Hillman, a psychologist, calls soul making. This message is actually repetitive. I have encountered this same message in many books. Okay, the dying of the ego, the dying of the self to come up with something beautiful, for something new to come out. Spiritual leaders like Thich Nhat Hanh and Eckhart Tolle mention in their books about the necessity of being at the present moment, to be not in autopilot mode. Being in the now means living mindfully. When we are mindful of the present, we see clearly what is around us. We experience life as it is, and we try to systematically look at the things, people, and events that need our attention. Once we are fully in the now, mindful of the present moment, though we are hurting, we are able to really make sense of the world and heal the wounds caused by the self. Ano ba tong self na to? In these books, the self is interchangeable with the term ego. The ego is the unobserved or unconscious mind. It is selfish, and it has caused the collective dysfunction we see in humanity. These books do not suggest, however, the total annihilation of the self or the ego. They do not suggest that you completely remove your ego, that you try to bury it, that you try to annihilate it, to destroy it. No, they do not suggest that. Instead, they do not call for the total removal of fear, greed, and desire. They send the message that one does not need to be good by trying too hard to be good, but instead we need to find the goodness, acknowledge the goodness, acknowledge the light that is already within each one of us, and we should allow that goodness, that light to instead emerge. When we begin to allow the goodness, the light in us to emerge, despite the presence of the greed, the fear, the pain, and other negative traits that we have, we start to gain consciousness. And again, I would like to repeat what I mentioned in slide 4. Knowing yourself begins with consciousness. In order to start the process of soul making, it is necessary to realize and embrace your truths, your history, despite it being ugly, in order to make sense of existence. This is exactly why great and celebrated artists were able to express through their works their deep, dark emotions and psychological states. They looked inside themselves deeply, they sought to understand, and they were able to manifest or create, though they were falling apart. Now that we have established the importance of consciousness, awareness, or openness in order to proceed with the process of soul making, allow me now to show you the phases of soul making. Remember, it will be difficult to proceed to step or phase 1 if you are in autopilot mode, if you are unconscious, unwilling to examine your life. If you are already mindful of the present moment, even if you are uncomfortable or hurting, you may move on to the next steps. Phase 1 is called seeking or finding. At this point, a person recognizes the interest to grow, and the person becomes a seeker. People who seek look for disciplines or methods that can help them live and make sense of the world. In our search, we also gradually heal the wounds of our unconscious self or ego. The best thing about searching is that it is a vital stage in our growth as soul builders. It gives us the tools to live our lives, and if we systematically look, we find that in some sense, the tools that we have gathered are actually connected, and they allow us to settle down. They allow us to move on to a practice or cluster of practices that satisfy our creativity and our passion. And we can also spend some time perfecting these tools that we have discovered while we seek. The next step is settling. Soul making is about communicating as deeply as possible through our soul with other humans, non-human beings, and with the rest of the world. If we are always seeking or finding or wondering, we cannot connect. We will not be able to connect, okay? Because we are always wondering, we're always looking for things. So how can we connect genuinely with people if we ourselves are still on the lookout for answers? Therefore, we must find ourselves settled at some point in our lives. We need to be convinced about something eventually. However, there are times when it is hard to settle. It is difficult to create an absolute sense of the world when we are in great pain and vulnerability. When this happens, we must permit ourselves to, number 3, surrender. To let go of the illusion of absolute control. True surrender calls for the wounds we bear to be accepted. When we surrender, we accept the wounds. True surrender forces us to spend time living in the darkness. But it does not mean that we allow the bad to emerge. Okay, again, I repeat that the awareness or the acknowledgement of the darkness is already consciousness. And it's mentioned by Thich Nhat Hanh, when we are mindful, when we are conscious, we allow the light, we allow the good to emerge. It deepens our understanding of what is right in front of us, even though it's hurting. And eventually, it will begin to fill us with compassion for ourselves and others. True surrender can be magical and redeeming. The next phase is soul making. Now, at some point in our lives, we shift between settling and surrendering. And while this happens, while we live our lives consciously, our practices in our life, in the universe, brings us to the stage of soul making. We are beginning to become an expert, an injured healer. We begin to volunteer to help others to heal. We begin to move on with life and to accept that it is a journey that requires our constant seeking. Throughout life, we realize that we settle and then we will be called to resettle, to move on, to fall down, and eventually we will also get up. And we submit to life and its circumstances over and over again. As we gradually master the redeeming nature of surrender, we become more nurturing and caring. You might be wondering, what about the people who are old and bitter and miserable? Well, I would say that they are perhaps still in phase 3, figuring out how to fully surrender. They're still trying to hold on to the illusion of absolute control. The last phase is soaring. We can experience soaring when we pass through the stages of soul making. Remember, when you are in the stage of soul making, you are inspired. You become accepting. You realize that life is all about falling down, getting up, submitting over and over again, and that there are things beyond our control. We do not have absolute control. Yun yung stage ng soul making. And despite the the paradoxes of life, despite the uncertainty, despite the challenges and pains, we are consciously living our lives, and that makes us inspired. We are able to create things. Now, once we pass through this stage, we may soar. Okay? Soaring happens when we conquer our worldly experiences. We are in absolute peace. In religions, soaring is associated with attaining nirvana, heaven, paradise, the promised land, and so on and so forth. Okay? Now, you might be wondering, have there been people who have experienced this phase? Well, of course. Okay? We have spiritual leaders who are tagged by a lot of people as peaceful. Okay? They're dying, but still they remain a grounding element of life. When people encounter them, they feel centered. Okay? Without words, these people who have experienced soaring can share their peace with others. Yan, yun yung mga taong perhaps napuntahan na nila yung phase 5. Naranasan nilang masaktan, mahulog. Ginamit nila yon para sila ay makagawa ng mga bagay na nakakapagbigay ng inspirasyon sa iba. Sila naman, nagkakaroon din sila ng feeling of being like in heaven. And even without words, just by being around these people, you can sense genuine peace. And you yourself would feel centered, grounded. Hindi ka mawawala sa iyong state of nirvana and heaven. You will get a glimpse of what it's like to be in paradise. Have you seen the movie Kiki's Delivery Service by Studio Ghibli? Okay, spoiler alert. In the movie, Kiki is a 13-year-old witch. She leaves home to train in another city for a year. In that new city, however, she struggles to meet ends. She eventually discovers that she is losing her witchy powers because she has been using them for a living. While she is
When
with
you
her
fly,
friend
you rely on
Ursula,
what's inside of you,
they
don't
talk
you?
about
Uh-huh.
finding
We fly with
inspiration
our spirit.
to begin
Trusting your
flying
spirit.
again.
Yes,
Now
yes,
I would
that's
like to show
exactly what I'm
you
talking
this
about. That
just
same
for you to
spirit is what makes
realize
me paint and
how
makes your friend
how we can
bake.
get inspiration through soul making, okay, spirit making, and how the spirit or the soul can help us do creative stuff. Okay, watch this clip.
When you fly, you rely on what's inside of you, don't you?
Uh-huh. We fly with our spirit.
Trusting your spirit. Yes, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That same spirit is what makes me paint and makes your friend bake.
This scene in the movie shows that challenges in life, the struggles in life, can sometimes burden us. And when we feel the heaviness of these problems, we sometimes lose sight of what is within us. We lose sight of the goodness, the inspiration, the light within us. We tend to ignore it and we or we function in autopilot mode. We become unconscious vessels that walk an uninspired life. It makes us lose our magic. However, if we take time to pause, just like what Kiki does in the movie, she goes with her friend Ursula to her cabin somewhere in the forest to rest, okay, to relax. If we do that, if we give our time to pause, to be mindful, to meditate, we become aware of what is going on in our lives, although we suffer, although we are worrying, and we begin to realize that we are called to either settle or surrender. Look at the dialogue between the two. Okay? We begin to recognize the things that are beyond our control, and we choose to deliberate our options. We let go of the illusion of absolute control. We act accordingly, but do not force things. We become conscious vessels that, in turn, become bearers of creative energies. In the same scene, Ursula advises Kiki to just simply take a break. Maybe you should just take a break. Yeah, but still I can't even fly. I can fly. Then stop trying. Take long walks, look at the scenery, doze off at noon, don't even think about flying, and then pretty soon you'll be flying again. You think my problems will go away? That's right. It's going to be fine. I promise. Okay? But doing nothing doesn't mean autopilot, huh? I suppose you have heard this message in some movies already. Okay, doing nothing and what's that? And being still are two different things. When a person is still, okay, it may be an exercise of mindfulness. When you do nothing, it's your mind being blank as well. Okay, you're on autopilot mode, but when you are still unbothered, okay, you're unbothered by the external forces or the internal forces that may be bothering you, then you are being mindful of your life, and through that you may be able to actually solve your problems. If not, you will be able to at least calm yourself by means of accepting what is, okay, or accepting what has to be accepted. However, sometimes training is lacking, and so in order to create art that expresses an individual insight, apprentices would copy the work of a master. This is called appropriation, and it has been a common occurrence in art. There are, however, several individuals who have reached the extreme by assuming that an artist's exact artwork is replicated and credited to himself. This could pose a problem with authorship in particular. The issue occurs when the artist of appropriation gets bits and pieces from an original work and incorporates these elements into his own work. Furthermore, when appropriation artists escape responsibility for putting the specifics of other works and incorporating them into their own, with that of the appropriation artist, the voices of the original masters and their perceptions are lost. There is actually a very thin line that separates the art of appropriation and forgery. Forgery can historically be categorized into two forms. The first is by producing outright copies of existing works. These works incorporate elements of an original work and infuse them into a new work. Another way of forging someone else's work is by means of studying the techniques and style used by an artist who is no longer alive, and also using as well the focal points highlighted in his past and present works. And then this contemporary artist would assume how the old forms would evolve and be used in his time. Okay? Since problems of plagiarism or forgery often arise, the motives of appropriation artists are oftentimes challenged as well. Some would say that the purpose behind the appropriation is that they simply want the audience to remember the images they replicated. There is a desire on the artist's part that the audiences will see a new take on the original work. In order to avoid forgery or plagiarism, a person may use the 7 genius principles of Leonardo da Vinci that can help open a person's imaginative genius. The first principle is curiosita or curiosity. It is an insatiable, curious approach to life and unrelenting quest for continuous learning. Da Vinci was not the only one to represent a nearly unlimited supply of curiosity. Some of the great inventors and leaders of humanity have the ability to unlock life's mystery. You can practice this by asking questions like what if and how come. You may also ask probing questions like what makes me happy? What is my purpose in life? What makes me annoyed and why? Are my triggers related to my past trauma? Do I even have a traumatic experience? Or am I just unconscious of it? You may also journal your ideas and observations. For example, when you wake up in the morning, okay, after dreaming a very revealing dream, okay, jot down. Okay, and if you have realizations, write them down. It may allow you to understand yourself better. If you have original thoughts, ideas, jot them down. And then at the end of the day, wrap up these ideas. The second principle is dimostrazione or independent thinking. It is a commitment to test knowledge through experience, persistence, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. Dimostrazione is the embodiment of your own hands controlling your life. Do not take anything for granted. Welcome experiences and learn from them. To practice this principle, you may do this. Don't take anyone else's word for an experience. Why don't you try it for yourself? Okay, look for an opportunity to grow and experience it. Okay, this principle tells us to test our own ideas as well, our current perception of things. Okay, this principle calls for that. Now, how to practice this? Try to reevaluate your current perception of things, especially those you strongly believe in. Look for the other angles or sides of the story. For example, by exercising this principle, I was able to learn about the social and cultural conditioning behind the eating of meat. I asked questions that tested my former perception about animals, perception about vegans and vegetarians. And eventually, it led me to settle to a principle that is entirely new to me even after 30 years of existence. I was already 30 plus years old when I settled to the principle of veganism. Okay? Constantly question your principles, constantly reassess your thoughts, okay, your constructs. You might be missing some things. And when you miss some things, you lose opportunities. When you lose opportunities, you lose chances of creating something new or reinventing yourself. The third principle is sensazione or refining senses. It is the continual refinement of the senses, especially sight, as the means to enliven experience. We often forget to savor and sensualize our experiences actually. We all have heard the adage, stop and smell the roses. But when did you actually stop and smell the roses for the last time? When was the last time you stopped to savor an experience? When was the last time you completely engaged at the present moment, doing nothing but mindfully experiencing life? Da Vinci was unbelievably inspired by the world around him, and the more he honed his senses, the greater his genius became. Practice this by honoring your senses every time you see, touch, smell, taste, or hear something. Go out, pick up something, okay? Smell a fragrant flower, marvel at its beauty, listen to the sounds of birds, get something to eat or bring with you something to eat while you are outside and savor each bite. Remove your slippers and walk barefoot on the grass or soil. It's called grounding. Touch the leaves, touch surfaces. You may also practice this by looking for a quiet place where nobody can find you or where nobody can disturb you. Sit quietly for 5 to 20 minutes if you can. Listen to your breathing as you inhale and exhale. Listen to the sounds of your surroundings. Close your eyes. Allow yourself to see nothing but darkness. Be in the void. Listen to your body. Feel your body. Feel your being during that present moment in that quiet place. The fourth principle is sfumato. It is a willingness to embrace confusion, paradox, and uncertainty. Da Vinci had a very special capacity to comprehend the extreme opposites of views and phenomena. He was also able to explore and revel in the uncertainty of unknowns. Most of us are uncomfortable with the questions not being known or unanswerable, so we avoid anything beyond our control. We stick to what we know and we simply Google right away to search for answers in order to know something. We simply cannot bear the feeling of not knowing anything. Some young people cannot bear the thought or the feeling of, what do you call that? Fear of missing out. May term kayo doon, FOMO. You have this fear of missing out. Okay? Practice sfumato. To practice this, ask questions even if they would make us uncomfortable and confused. By asking questions that confuse us, we may be able to know something new. Try to ask a question and do not Google the answer for this. Try to guess. By embracing ambiguity, we also learn to cultivate endurance to confusion. I repeat, when we learn how to embrace ambiguity, we cultivate our endurance of uncertainty. We become less afraid. We become more trusting. We will gradually learn true surrender once we realize that there are really things beyond our human mind capacity and control. While of course, there are those concepts which make us, we will also realize that there are simply concepts that make us fear for no logical reason at all. The fifth principle is arte scienza. It is the development of the balance between science and art, logic and imagination. Although Da Vinci was not around for the right and left brain learning experiments, this notion speaks directly to the whole brain thinking idea. Remember that imagination without logic is simply daydreaming, and logic without imagination is boring. One fun way to exercise this is by means of switching between your right and left hands when writing, drawing, or even simply holding things. The sixth principle is corporalita, or mind and body care. It is the cultivation of beauty, inborn talent, fitness, and poise. In addition to his intellectual ability, Da Vinci was unbelievably athletic. From early on, he knew that his body also had to be in top shape if he wanted his mind to work at optimum levels. Corporalita is about maintaining a healthy body as well as a healthy mind, because fit minds lead to more innovative and creative solutions. How to practice this? So we have the usual recommendations, especially by health specialists. Eat healthy. I hope that I would inspire you when I tell you that I have been vegan for years, and I feel so lighter and healthier. I hope that you could consider looking into this lifestyle. This is not just a diet, it is a principle, a lifestyle, because it will not only benefit you physically. I believe that this is an ethical thing to do for the animals, the planet, and the human race. Another tip or another way of practicing corporalita is by getting enough sleep. Okay, another one is by moving a lot. Practice yoga or perhaps Tai Chi, do Pilates or whatever form of fitness exercise even when you are at home with a limited time. At the very least, walk, do breathing exercises, meditate. The last principle is connessione or interconnectedness. It is a recognition of and appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things and phenomena. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist, calls interconnectedness interbeing. He actually said in one of his books, "If you are a poet, you will see clearly that there is a cloud floating in this sheet of paper. Without a cloud, there will be no rain. Without rain, the trees cannot grow. And without trees, we cannot make paper." If we look at a child, it is easy to see the child's mother and father, grandmother and grandfather in her. The way she looks, the way she acts, the things she says. Even her skills and talents are the same as her parents. When she walks and talks, they walk and talk as well. Looking into the child, we can be in touch with her parents and ancestors, but equally, looking into the parent, we can see the child. We do not exist independently. We inter-are. A child is a continuation of her parents, and her ancestors are inside her. Everything relies on everything else in this cosmos in order to manifest, whether a star, a cloud, a flower, a tree, or you and me. I actually find his message, Thich Nhat Hanh's message, very beautiful. If you want to put this principle into practice, sit down and see how you are connected with the things and people which are very near you. How do you benefit from them? How do they benefit from you? Contemplate on the problems as well of our society now. Ask yourself questions like, do my choices or preferences affect others? How can I make myself a positive contribution to the society where I am a part of? You would actually be surprised at how real this connection is. This disconnection causes people to disregard others and to move in autopilot for their own survival. Alright, this is the end of this lecture. I know that the things here go beyond artistic expression. It's more than that. The concept of soul making and the division principles are things that we cannot only just apply in art making. These are concepts, principles that we can apply in our lives in general. I hope that you will be able to take some time to savor these concepts or things in order to arrive at a fresh and inspiring life insight. If you want to read more, you may check out these references. This is the end of Lesson 5.